The Galactic Concordat had ruled the stars for 12,000 years, and in all that time, no species had truly challenged its ancient laws or questioned its endless bureaucracy, for the Concordat was power itself. A sprawling alliance of 4,000 species, bound together by treaties older than most civilizations could remember. And every species that joined understood one simple truth: you followed the rules, or you disappeared into the dark spaces between stars where no one would ever find. You humanity had joined this great alliance 60 years ago, arriving with smiles on their faces and wonder in their eyes. And the older species had looked upon them with mild curiosity and quiet contempt. For what were humans but another young race crawling out of their birth world? Primitive creatures who had barely mastered faster than light travel. Emotional beings who laughed too loud and cried too easily, and seemed to think that friendship actually meant something in the cold equations of galactic politics ambassador. Kethvar of the Drawn hegemony despised humans more than most. Watching them spread across the galaxy like insects finding cracks in a wall, settling world after world with their endless optimism and their nauseating belief that tomorrow would always be better than today. And he had served the hegemony for 300 years, had watched empires rise and fall, had learned that the universe respected only one thing: strength. Pure and absolute and merciless his cruiser, the dominance of ages, hung in space near the velar expanse on what should have been an ordinary patrol. And when his sensors detected a human colonial transport passing through the region, he saw an opportunity that made his 4 hearts beat faster with anticipation. For the transport was alone, unescorted, carrying 200 colonists towards some distant settlement world. And Kethvar knew that humans were too polite to refuse an inspection from a Concordat member species. Signal them to halt, he commanded his bridge crew, his scaled face splitting into what passed for a smile among the Drawn. Tell them we suspect contraband and require a full inspection of their vessel. The human captain protested, of course, citing travel permits and cargo manifests and all the proper documentation that should have made such an inspection unnecessary. But Kethvar simply reminded him that the Drawn hegemony had authority in this sector, and resistance would be noted in official reports, and within the hour. His soldiers were boarding the transport with weapons drawn and contempt radiating from every movement. The colonists were gathered in the main hold, families with children, engineers and farmers and teachers, ordinary humans on their way to build a new life on a distant world. And they stood in frightened clusters as Drawn soldiers moved through their belongings, breaking open containers, scanning for weapons that did not exist, making a show of authority that was really just cruelty. Wearing a uniform among the colonists stood a woman named Mei Chun, holding tightly to the hand of her 7-year-old daughter Lily, trying to keep the child calm as armored aliens twice their height stomped through the hold with murder in their eyes. And Lily was scared but also curious, for she had never seen a Drawn before, had only heard stories about the different species that shared the stars with humanity. "Mama," Lily whispered, tugging at her mother's sleeve, "why are they so angry at us?" "Shh, baby," May replied, her voice trembling despite her efforts to stay strong. "Just stay close to me and everything will be fine. But children are curious creatures." And Lily's attention wandered as the inspection dragged on. And when she spotted a Drawn soldier examining a crate near the edge of the hold, she slipped free of her mother's grip and wandered closer, wanting to see the strange alien symbols on his armor, wanting to understand why these beings seemed to hate her people so much. The soldier's name was Korax, and he had killed humans before, had burned their settlements on contested border worlds, had learned to see them as nothing more than pests to be exterminated. And when the small human child appeared at his elbow, looking up at him with those strange round eyes filled with innocent curiosity, something dark and cruel twisted in his chest, What do you want?" he snarled, his translator turning the words into harsh sounds that made Lily flinch. "I just wanted to see," she said softly, her voice small and uncertain. "Your armor is very pretty." The other soldiers laughed, and Korax felt embarrassment burn through him like acid. For this tiny creature had made him look soft in front of his comrades. And without thinking, without considering consequences, he swung his armored hand and struck the child across the face. Lily fell, her small body hitting the deck plating with a sound that silenced every voice in the hold. And her head struck the metal floor at exactly the wrong angle, and she did not move, did not cry, did not do anything at all. Mei Chun screamed, a sound that would haunt every soul who heard it until their dying day. And Korax laughed. He laughed because he did not understand what he had done. Laughed because to him this was just another dead human. Just another pest eliminated, and his fellow soldiers joined him, their harsh voices echoing through the hold as May collapsed beside her daughter's body, and the other colonists stood frozen in horror and disbelief. None of them noticed that the transport's emergency beacon had activated automatically the moment Lily fell, broadcasting everything: the footage, the audio, the biometric data confirming death to every human ship within 50 light years. And none of them knew about the network that humanity had built in secret, the quantum-linked system called Guardian that connected every human military asset across 300 worlds. The alert reached Earth in 0.003 of a second. Admiral Helena Vance was sitting in a budget meeting when her neural implant screamed Priority 1 alert directly into her brain, and she accessed the footage with a thought: watching a 7-year-old girl die while aliens laughed. And her coffee cup shattered in her grip as rage unlike anything she had ever known flooded through her entire being. 6 minutes later, she had authorization from the United Earth Council, a body famous for endless debate and bureaucratic delays. But the vote was unanimous, and it took only 14 seconds. For every human who watched that footage felt the same thing: a fury that transcended politics and ideology and every petty difference that had ever divided their species. "Guardian Protocol 7, Admiral Vance announced to the combined fleet, her voice steady despite the fire burning in her chest. All assets engage immediately. No restrictions apply. Show them no mercy. Across 300 worlds, human ships that had been hidden for 60 years began to move. Ambassador Kethvar had no idea that his species had 11 minutes left as a galactic power. He was still filing formal complaints about human hysteria when the sky above his cruiser filled with warships. Ambassador Kethvar stood on the bridge of his cruiser, watching his communications officer send yet another formal complaint to the Human Colonial Authority, demanding an apology for what he called emotional overreaction to a minor disciplinary incident. And he felt quite pleased with himself, for surely the humans would grovel and apologize as they always did. Surely they would accept whatever fine or sanction the Concordat imposed and go back to being the quiet little species that everyone ignored. His tactical officer made a sound that Kethvar had never heard before, a choking gasp of pure terror. "Ambassador," the officer whispered, his scales turning pale gray. "You need to see this." The main view screen flickered and changed, and Kethvar felt his 4 hearts stop beating for a long moment as he witnessed the impossible. For the space around his cruiser was no longer empty, was no longer safe, was no longer anything but a death trap closing around him from every direction. 72 human warships had dropped out of faster-than-light travel in perfect synchronization, forming a sphere around the dominance of ages with mathematical precision. Their weapons already powered, and their targeting systems already locked. And these were not the small patrol vessels that the Concordat had seen humans operate. These were massive ships bristling with weapons that made drawn military technology look like children's toys. How is this possible? Kefar demanded, his voice cracking with fear he could not hide. Where did they come from? They had come from everywhere. The Guardian network had calculated the optimal response in milliseconds, drawing ships from 12 different sectors, coordinating their jumps so perfectly that they arrived as a single unified force. And the humans aboard those ships shared one thought, one purpose, one burning need that transcended everything else they had ever known. The child was dead, and someone was going to pay. Kefar attempted to invoke Concordat diplomatic immunity, his translator broadcasting his words to every human vessel as he cited ancient laws and sacred treaties, reminding them that attacking a hegemony ship would mean war with the third largest military in the galaxy, warning them that the consequences would be severe and lasting and utterly devastating to their young species. Human response was a single transmission. It showed Lily Chun's face, her school photograph. 7 years old. Gap-toothed, smile bright, with all the joy and hope and innocent wonder that she would never feel again then. The guns fired at the dominance of ages had shields rated to withstand antimatter weapons, had armor plating designed to survive direct hits from planetary defense cannons, had point defense systems that could track and destroy 1,000 incoming missiles simultaneously. But none of it mattered, for the human weapons cut through those defenses like they were made of paper, and the cruiser that had terrorized 100 worlds became an expanding cloud of debris in exactly 4 seconds. Kefar died without understanding what had happened, without knowing that his casual cruelty had awakened something that the galaxy had never seen, without realizing that humanity had been hiding in plain sight for 60 years, waiting, watching, building. But humanity was not satisfied with one ship across the drawn hegemony. Alarms began to scream as human fleets appeared at the edges of their territory, not approaching slowly as proper military forces should, but jumping directly into combat range with weapons already firing. And the drawn commanders who faced them discovered a terrible truth. The intelligence reports they had relied upon were worthless. The Concordat believed humanity maintained approximately 200 combat vessels, a modest defense force appropriate for a young species still learning its place in the galaxy. The true number was 12,000 for 60 years. Humanity had smiled politely at galactic gatherings while secretly building the largest military force the Concordat had ever seen, hiding ships in asteroid fields and gas giant atmospheres and the dark spaces between stars where no one ever thought to look. And they called this hidden armada the Quiet Fleet, named for the silence they had maintained while preparing for a day they hoped would never come. Now that day had arrived, and the Quiet Fleet was quiet no longer. The Galactic Concordat convened an emergency session within hours of the first attack. 4,000 species gathering virtually to address what they called human aggression, demanding that humanity stand down immediately and submit to Concordat arbitration, threatening sanctions and embargoes and military intervention if humans did not obey. Director Sarah Okonkwo represented humanity at that session, a tall woman with iron gray hair and eyes that held no warmth whatsoever. And she listened to the threats and demands and righteous speeches with the patience of a predator waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The Concordat demands that humanity cease all military operations immediately, the council speaker announced. A massive crystalline being from a species older than human civilization. You will withdraw your forces and submit to judgment for this unprovoked aggression. Director Okonkwo smiled, and every species watching felt a chill run through whatever passed for their spines. Unprovoked, she repeated, tasting the word like poison. You call this unprovoked? She broadcast the footage, Lily Chun falling, her mother screaming, the drawn soldiers laughing, and forced every delegate to watch it, to see exactly what humanity had seen, to understand that this was not politics or territory or resources. This was a murdered child, You wrote laws to govern civilized species, Okonkwo said, her voice cutting through the sudden silence like a blade through flesh. The Dron proved themselves to be animals when they killed one of our children and laughed about it. And we will treat them accordingly. This is madness, the Dron representative shouted, his scales flushing dark with rage. You cannot wage war over one insignificant. He never finished that sentence. Conco terminated the connection, cutting humanity off from the Concordat communication network. And her last words echoed through the chamber, long after her image vanished. Watch what happens next. The galaxy watched. And the galaxy trembled within 48 hours. Human ships had penetrated deep into Dron territory, appearing and disappearing like ghosts, striking military targets with impossible precision, and then vanishing before reinforcements could arrive. And the Dron discovered that their vaunted intelligence network was blind, their communication systems compromised, their military command structure falling apart, as humans surgically eliminated key installations faster than orders could be sent. The Battle of HFY Prime began on the third day. 2,000 human warships descending upon the ambassador's homeworld, while 800 Dron vessels scrambled to defend it. And the Dron commanders believed they could hold. Believed that their orbital defenses and planetary shields would buy time for reinforcements to arrive. They were wrong. Commander Marcus Webb led the assault from his flagship, a massive vessel that the humans had named with deliberate cruelty. And when the Dron saw that name written in burning letters across their tactical displays, they understood at last what kind of enemy they faced. The ship was called Lily's Vengeance, and vengeance had come for them all. The sky above HFY Prime burned with the light of 1,000 dying ships as Commander Marcus Webb watched the battle unfold from the bridge of Lily's Vengeance, his face carved from stone and his heart filled with a cold fury that left no room for mercy or hesitation or anything that might slow the destruction he had come to deliver. The Dron fought with everything they had. 800 warships supported by orbital defense, platforms and planetary shields that had never fallen to any enemy in 8,000 years of warfare. And their commanders screamed orders and deployed every tactic their species had ever developed. But nothing worked. Nothing even slowed the human advance. For the humans were not fighting the way wars were supposed to be fought. They were fighting as one. The Guardian network connected every human ship in the battle, sharing tactical data and targeting solutions and threat assessments in real time. And each vessel knew exactly what every other vessel would do before it did it, allowing them to coordinate their attacks with a precision that made the Dron feel like they were fighting a single vast organism rather than a fleet of individual ships. A Dron battlecruiser would fire its main cannons at a human destroyer, and the destroyer would already be moving, sliding sideways through space as 3 other human ships converged on the battlecruiser from unexpected angles. And before the Dron could adjust their targeting, their ship was nothing but expanding debris and screaming radiation. They cannot possibly maintain this coordination, the Dron fleet commander shouted at his tactical officers. No species can think this fast. No network can process this much data. But humans were not like other species. They had evolved on a death world, a planet where everything tried to kill them, where survival required instant cooperation and absolute trust, where hesitation meant becoming food for some predator or victim to some natural disaster. And 60,000 years of that pressure had shaped them into something unique in the galaxy, a species capable of becoming more than the sum of their parts when their survival was threatened, and nothing threatened human survival quite like harm to their children. The Dron orbital defenses fell within 2 hours. Massive platforms that had taken centuries to build reduced to wreckage by weapons that tore through their shields like claws through paper. And the planetary defense grid collapsed shortly after, leaving HFY Prime naked and vulnerable beneath. A sky filled with human warships, the Drawn. Civilians looked up and waited for death to fall upon them. It did not come instead of orbital bombardment. The humans deployed landing craft, thousands of them, descending through the atmosphere like rain, carrying soldiers in powered armor that made them look like metal giants from some ancient nightmare. And these soldiers touched down near military installations and weapons factories and command centers, ignoring the civilian population entirely as they focused on destroying every tool of war the Drawn possessed. Drawn reporter broadcasting from the capital city captured footage that would be seen on 10,000 worlds within the hour, showing human soldiers walking past terrified civilians without so much as glancing at them, their weapons cold and their attention fixed on the military bunker 3 blocks away. And when the bunker's defenders opened fire, the humans responded with overwhelming force that left nothing but rubble and smoke. Why? The reporter asked a human officer who paused near her camera, "Why are you not destroying our cities? Why are you not killing everyone?" The officer's helmet turned toward her, and through the faceplate she could see human eyes, tired eyes, sad eyes, eyes that held no joy in what they were doing. "Because we are not monsters," he said, his voice flat and mechanical through his suit's speakers. "We kill soldiers, we destroy weapons, we burn military targets to the ground, but we do not murder civilians. We do not slaughter children, we are not you." He walked away, and the reporter watched as his squad entered the bunker, and the sounds of combat echoed from within. And she understood something that her species had failed to grasp until this moment. Humans were not weak because they chose peace. Humans were not soft because they valued life. Humans were something far more terrifying than any mindless killing machine could ever be. Humans were civilized predators who had simply chosen to keep their claws sheathed until now. The Battle of Kethvar Prime ended 6 hours after it began. The largest military installation in Drawn space reduced to burning wreckage while the civilian population remained largely untouched. And the message this sent to the rest of the galaxy was clear: humanity could have committed genocide, could have burned every Drawn world to ash, could have done everything that the Drawn themselves would have done in their position. They chose not to, but the war was far from over. And now came the part that truly terrified the Concordat, the operations that humans called gray missions, named for the moral ambiguity that surrounded them. Though there was nothing ambiguous about their purpose, human special forces began appearing on Drawn worlds without warning. They bypassed every security system, every detection grid, every trap and alarm and defensive measure that the Drawn had developed over millennia of paranoid military preparation. And they moved through enemy territory like ghosts, like shadows, like death itself, walking calmly through locked doors and sealed bunkers. Their targets were specific. Remember the soldiers who had boarded that colonial transport. Remember the ones who had watched a child die and laughed. Remember their names and faces and service records. Human intelligence had all of it, had traced every single Drawn who had been present when Lily Chun fell. And now hunters were coming for them across the vastness of Space Orcs. The soldier who had struck Lily, the one whose blow had ended her life, fled to his family home on a remote agricultural world, believing himself safe among his relatives, believing that the chaos of war would hide him until the humans tired of their revenge. He was wrong. He woke in the middle of the night to find a human woman standing over his bed, her face hidden behind tactical goggles, her hand holding a knife that gleamed in the dim light. And around him, his family slept on, completely unaware that death had entered their home and chosen not to take them. "Korax of the 3rd Assault Battalion," the woman said, her voice barely a whisper. "You killed a child named Lily Chun, and you laughed as she died." Korax tried to call for help, tried to reach for the weapon he kept beneath his pillow, tried to do anything other than lie frozen in terror as this human nightmare held him pinned with nothing but the weight of her gaze. "You will come with me now," she continued, "and you will face justice for what you did not death, something worse, something that will make you wish for death every moment of your miserable existence." She took him without waking a single member of his family. She took him to face the judgment of humanity and across the drawn hegemony. Other teams were doing the same thing, collecting every soldier who had been present on that transport. Gathering them like specimens for an experiment in terror, the galaxy began to understand that you could not hide from human vengeance. You could only wait for it to find you. The war lasted exactly 21 days, and in that brief span of time, humanity dismantled 8,000 years of drawn military power with the cold efficiency of surgeons removing a cancer from a body, striking only at targets that served the machinery of war while leaving civilian infrastructure largely intact. And every species in the Concordat watched this selective destruction with a mixture of terror and fascination. On the fifth day, the drawn shipyards at Varax fell, massive orbital facilities that had built warships for 300 generations, reduced to twisted metal and floating debris by human weapons that seemed to cut through shields like they were not even there. On the eighth day, the military academies of the inner worlds surrendered without firing a shot after human forces surrounded them and broadcast a simple message: "Come out unarmed and you will live. Resist and you will die. Choose now." On the 12th day, the Drawn High Command abandoned their fortified bunker complex and fled to a secret location that had never been recorded in any database, a hidden refuge known only to the highest-ranking officials, and human special forces were waiting for them when they arrived, having somehow learned the location before the Drawn themselves had decided to use it. How? The supreme commander of the Drawn military demanded as human soldiers bound his hands and prepared him for transport. "How do you know everything? How do you see everything? How do you appear from nowhere?" The human soldier who answered him was young, barely more than a child by Drawn standards. But her eyes held the weight of something ancient and terrible. "You killed one of our children," she said. "Did you really think we would not learn everything about you in return?" On the 19th day, the Drawn government offered unconditional surrender, broadcasting their plea across every communication channel they still controlled, promising to accept any terms humanity demanded, begging for an end to the nightmare that had consumed their civilization. Director Sarah Okonkwo rejected their surrender in a transmission that every species in the galaxy received. Simultaneously, surrender implies negotiation, she said, her face expressionless on screens across 10,000 worlds. It implies that we might accept less than what we came for, that there is room for bargaining, that some form of compromise is possible. She paused, and in that pause the galaxy heard the death of Drawn pride. "We are not negotiating," Okonkwo continued. "We are teaching you, teaching the Concordat, teaching every species that might one day think about harming a human child. And our lesson is not complete." On the 21st day, the lesson ended. Human forces had occupied every major Drawn world, had dismantled every military base, had destroyed every weapon capable of threatening another species. And now they stood in the ashes of what had been a proud civilization and prepared for the final act of their terrible drama. The trial, a human tribunal convened on Kethvar Prime, broadcast across every inhabited world in the galaxy with no way to turn off the signal. And before it stood the soldiers who had been present when Lily Chun died. 17 Drawn in total, captured by human special forces from hiding places scattered across the hegemony. Korax stood at the center, his scales pale and his eyes empty, broken by weeks of captivity and the certain knowledge that whatever came next would be worse than anything he could imagine. The evidence was presented with cold precision footage from the transport's emergency beacon. Testimony from the colonists who had witnessed everything. Forensic analysis of Lily's injuries that proved beyond any doubt that Corax's blow had killed her. The verdict was unanimous and instant guilty. Galaxy waited for the sentence, expecting execution or life imprisonment or some other punishment that civilized species used against those who committed atrocities. And the Concordat delegates whispered among themselves about what precedent this would set, about how humanity would reveal itself through the vengeance it chose to take humanity. Surprise them all. The convicted will not be executed, the tribunal judge announced. A woman whose daughter had been the same age as Lily Chun, whose voice remained steady through sheer force of will. Death would end their suffering too quickly, would let them escape the consequences of their actions, would give them peace they do not deserve. Corax looked up, hope flickering in his eyes for the first time. In weeks that hope died as the judge continued. The convicted will be marked with the symbol of their crime, the face of Lily Chun tattooed on their flesh where it can never be hidden, and they will be released to return to drawn space as living monuments to what happens when you harm a human child. The courtroom erupted in confusion from the alien observers, for this made no sense. This was not justice. This was letting murderers go free, but Mei Chun stood in the gallery, Lily's mother who had screamed when her daughter fell, and she spoke the words that silenced every voice. They will live as warnings, she said, her voice cracking but resolute. Every Dran who sees them will remember what they did, will remember what it cost their civilization, will remember that humanity destroyed an empire because of one murdered child, and they will carry that knowledge in their flesh until the day they die. She looked directly at Corax, and he flinched as though struck. You will wake every morning knowing that your cruelty ended your people's future as a military power. May continued. You will see Lily's face every time you look in a mirror, and you will know that she, a 7-year-old girl who just wanted to see your armor, was worth more than your entire species proved to be. The tattooing was done publicly, broadcast to the same audience that had watched the trial, and the words inscribed beneath Lily's face on each soldier's body were simple and devastating. We killed a human child, humanity destroyed our empire. Remember what they showed us. Mercy we did not deserve. The 17 marked soldiers were returned to drawn space in a transport that traveled slowly, making stops at every major world so that populations could see them, could read the words on their flesh, could understand the message that humanity had written in ink and blood in the ashes of military installations. The drawn people watched their broken soldiers return, and they understood not just the danger of angering humanity, but something deeper, something that cut to the core of how they had seen the universe for 8,000 years. They had believed that strength meant cruelty, that power meant the freedom to hurt those weaker than themselves. That civilization was just a mask worn by predators to hide their true nature. Humanity had proven them wrong. Humanity had possessed the strength to commit genocide, the power to burn every drawn world to ash, the military might to do anything they wanted to a defeated enemy, and they had chosen mercy instead. Not weakness masquerading as virtue, but true mercy, the kind that came from knowing exactly how much pain you could inflict and deciding not to inflict it. The Dran would rebuild eventually, would become a peaceful species focused on trade and culture rather than conquest, would remember for 1,000 generations the lesson that humanity had taught them. But first, they would learn to look at their marked soldiers and feel shame instead of anger. The trial was over. The teaching was complete now. Came the reckoning for everyone else. The Galactic Concordat convened its largest assembly in 3,000 years. 4,000 species gathering in the great chamber of the Council Homeworld to address what they called the human question and the Fear in that chamber was so thick that even species without the ability to smell emotions could taste it in the recycled air. Some delegates demanded that humanity be expelled from the Concordat immediately, arguing that such a violent and unpredictable species had no place among civilized peoples, that allowing them to remain was simply inviting more destruction, that the safety of the galaxy required humanity to be isolated and contained before they could threaten anyone else. Others argued for a preemptive military strike, pooling the forces of multiple species to destroy humanity before they grew even stronger, pointing out that 12,000 human warships had defeated the third largest military in the Concordat in just 3 weeks, calculating how many ships it would take to overwhelm human defenses, drafting plans for the complete annihilation of human civilization. A few delegates, the oldest and wisest among them, simply suggested surrender, proposing that the Concordat acknowledge human superiority and accept whatever terms they demanded, arguing that resistance was pointless against a species that had hidden such power for 60 years, while smiling politely at every diplomatic function. The debate raged for hours, voices rising in fear and anger and desperate hope, until finally the council speaker called for silence and announced that the human representative had arrived to address the assembly. Director Sarah Okonkwo walked into that chamber alone, a single human woman facing 4,000 species who had just been discussing her people's destruction. And she carried no weapons, wore no armor, displayed no sign of the military might that had shattered drawn civilization. In less than a month, she simply stood at the center of the chamber and waited for silence. "I have been listening to your debate," she said when the last whispers faded, her voice carrying to every corner of the vast space through the chamber's acoustic systems. "You have been discussing what to do about humanity, whether to expel us or attack us or surrender to us, treating us as a problem to be solved rather than a species to be understood." She paused, her gaze sweeping across thousands of alien faces, reading fear and hatred and confusion in equal measure. "You spent 60 years wondering why we smiled so much, why we seemed so friendly, why we worked so hard to make friends and build alliances when we could have been building empires. And now that you have seen what we are capable of, you assume that we must have been deceiving you all along, that our kindness was a mask hiding our true predatory nature." Director Okonkwo shook her head slowly. "You do not understand us at all." She raised her hand, and a holographic image appeared above her, Lily Chun's school photograph. The same image that had been broadcast before the destruction of Ambassador Kethvar's cruiser. A 7-year-old girl, smiling with all the innocent joy of a child who believed the universe was wonderful. "We were not pretending to be soft," Okonkwo said, her voice hardening to steel. "We were choosing to be soft every day, every interaction, every moment when we could have been cruel and chose kindness instead. We were making a deliberate choice to be the species we wanted to be, rather than the species our evolutionary history made us." She gestured at the assembly around her. "You look at predator species and prey species, at aggressive empires and peaceful traders, and you think you understand what you are seeing, but humans are something different, something that your categories cannot contain. Because we are both predator and civilized being, both capable of terrible violence and genuinely committed to peace." The hologram of Lily Chun slowly rotated above the chamber. "One of your members chose to take that choice away from us," Okonkwo continued. "The Drawn killed one of our children not in war, not in self-defense, not for any reason other than casual cruelty, and they laughed about it, as though human lives were worthless, as though our children were insects to be crushed without thought." Her voice rose, filling the chamber with cold fury. "Now you have seen what happens when you force us to stop choosing peace." The assembly was utterly silent. 4,000 species holding their breath as this human woman spoke truths they did not want to hear. We do not want your fear, Okonkwo said, her voice softening slightly, but losing none of its intensity. We do not want your submission or your worship or your desperate alliances. We want exactly what we have always wanted. What we have worked toward for 60 years of smiling diplomacy. She spread her hands. A gesture of openness that somehow felt more threatening than any weapon. We want to be your friends, your partners, your allies in building a galaxy where every species can thrive. We want peace and cooperation and the kind of future where children like Lily Chun can grow up to see wonders we cannot even imagine today. Her hands dropped to her sides, and her expression shifted to something that made ancient beings tremble. But if you harm our children, any of our children, anywhere in this galaxy, for any reason, we will end you. She let those words hang in the air for a long moment. Not your military, not your government, not your capacity for war. We will end your civilization so completely that in 1,000 years, scholars will debate whether your species ever existed at all. Okonkwo smiled then. The same soft and patient smile that humanity had worn for 60 years. And somehow that smile was more terrifying than all the weapons in the human fleet. So please, she said, a voice warm and friendly and utterly sincere. Let us all continue being friends. The Lily Chun Accords were ratified unanimously within the hour, establishing absolute protection for the young of all species, making any deliberate harm to children a crime that would trigger immediate intervention from the entire Concordat, creating enforcement mechanisms that every species understood would actually mean human enforcement. 50 years passed. The Drom became peaceful traders. Their military reduced to defensive forces barely capable of protecting their own borders. Their culture transformed by the shame of what they had done and the mercy they had received in return. Humanity continued to smile at diplomatic functions, continued to make friends and build alliances, continued to be exactly as soft and kind as they had always appeared to be. But now every species understood what lay beneath that surface. What slumbered behind those friendly eyes? What would awaken if anyone was foolish enough to repeat the Dron's mistake? Statues of Lily Chun stood on 1,000 worlds. Monuments to an innocent child whose death had changed the galaxy forever. And at the base of each statue, the same words were inscribed in every known language. She was curious, she was kind, she was ours. And beneath that, smaller, in letters that seemed to burn with cold fire, never again, in the dark spaces between stars. Human ships still patrolled, watching, waiting, remembering, guardians of a peace built on the understanding that kindness and strength were not opposites. That mercy could be more devastating than cruelty. That the species which chose to be gentle was far more dangerous than any species that simply could not help being violent. And somewhere on a distant colony world, a little girl who had never heard of Lily Chun looked up at the stars with wonder in her eyes, safe in the knowledge that an entire galaxy had sworn to protect her. That was the lesson humanity had taught. That was the legacy Lily Chun had left behind. That was why, for 1,000 years and more, no child would ever be harmed the way she had been harmed. Not because the galaxy feared human weapons, but because the galaxy had learned to value human love.